Hi, and welcome to Total Recall. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and Fantastic Four Grand Design.
I'm Matt Zeoli.
And today we're talking about Barry Windsor-Smith's Monsters.
Wow, what a great read. Thanks for turning me on to this, Tom.
Sure, yeah, this is like, you know, the book of the hour. It's a major release, and we'll talk about all the different reasons and why. We pepper our episodes with comics content from time to time. I mean, comics are just sort of like central to my life and just so important. And I know they have a place for you, probably not as central, but
yeah,
they are, you know.
There's a place in my heart for comics.
Yeah, and so like if something like really special comes along, and I felt like this would be a good one for us to talk about because we've talked about the Hulk. You've talked about like your fandom of the Hulk.
Yes, this was a originally started as was it a Hulk story?
That was like a big part of it, and it's a big part of like the discussion surrounding this book, like even the way they promote it and the way Barry Windsor-Smith himself talks about it. Like the thing of it being a Hulk, like starting out its life as a Hulk story, seems like it's still kind of central and important. Like I feel like you can understand and appreciate this book separate from that, but when we're reading it, just because of like what we know and because of the way it's promoted, and because of like what the Hulk means to us, it's like you can't pretend that that's not part of it. So it is, and it was kind of central to my appreciation, my understanding, and my enjoyment of the book. Was that aspect of it.
That only enhanced it for me.
Barry Windsor-Smith is like this, just this sort of like really important figure in comics. He's an artist, a writer, co-writer, I had written an article about him like maybe like 10 years ago, and the title was something like Whatever Happened to Barry Windsor-Smith. It was something along those lines. It had been a lot of years since the last Barry Windsor-Smith comic, and he was somebody who was like so central to comics, such a huge figure, and then it seemed like he sort of vanished, and I was kind of, you know, curious why that was. And he's British. He's kind of part of like the like sort of Marvel Comics generation that was kind of like sort of like a second wave. It wasn't he wasn't with like the Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Stan Lee kind of thing. Like he was kind of like the second wave. He was like one of the young guys in the office, kind of like another Hulk stalwart, Herb Trimpe, who was like the artist of the Hulk. He had a very long tenure on the Hulk. His look kind of was like the look of the Hulk for a while, but anyway, he was part of that generation. That's like, you know, sort of like a little more hippie-ish, a little more like the other guys were like a little more staid. He was like a little more of like that next generation, and with the British accent. And like in a recent interview, he was saying like Stan Lee told him like, "Oh, it's like I'm talking to the Beatles when I talk to you." But so he kind of came on the scene, and he came in with like a lot of energy and a lot of style, and his stuff was like really attractive. It was and a way that I kind of like relate to him a little bit. Like his early stuff was like imbued with like a huge over-the-top Jack Kirby influence.
I'm not sure at first blush what his artwork reminds, and I had seen his artwork, but I didn't know it was Barry Windsor-Smith. Bernie Wrightson, would you say in the same like ballpark?
Yeah, they do cross over,
complementary kind of.
He was also like, I think he shared a studio with Bernie Wrightson.
Oh, awesome!
There was like this point where it was called The Studio, and it was like Barry Windsor-Smith, Bernie Wrightson, Mike Kaluta, maybe a couple names are slipping my.
It's like Andy Warhol's like factory. It's like
I think they were kind of thinking of that, but it was like a bunch of artists, very serious, very committed to sort of like the art and the craft of comics. And very like illustrative. Like they wanted to make comics that were art, and a big part of that was just the surface. They wanted to make like beautiful comics, and they wanted to create them at their own pace. Like they wanted to create you know, beautiful works. And so Barry Windsor-Smith, he sort of started out doing like Jack Kirby style action adventure stories. He did his first thing for Marvel, I think, was like an X-Men story. You know, looks very Kirby-esque, and then he did like some Daredevil issues, very Kirby-esque, and then he did some Avengers and stuff, very Kirby-esque. But his big claim to fame was that he and Roy Thomas sort of created the comics version of Conan the Barbarian.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. when we would go to the comic convention in Monroeville when we were in like middle school, I do remember scoring some Conan comics from like the dealers there back in the day, but I didn't put two and two together to know it was Barry Windsor-Smith.
Yeah, he was like the early ones, maybe 18 or 19 issues. Like I'm not sure exactly how many issues, but prior to that, Conan was just kind of this like relic. He was kind of like this, this pulp magazine character who would like occasionally get these like paperback compilations and stuff like that. But Roy Thomas was the guy who was like he was like the pulp fan and was looking at different things that he could bring to Marvel, different things he could sort of like buy the rights to and bring in. And so he kind of like honed in on Conan, brought Conan, and then like he got together with Barry Windsor-Smith, and it was just magic. And Barry was off and running and sort of co-writing these stories in addition to drawing them, and it's like amazing stuff. And so he did that, and then he kind of like disappeared for a couple issues, then came back, and then disappeared again. In retrospect, he's sort of come out and said that it was health related, that he at the time had cancer.
Oh my God!
And he had to return to England to get treated, socialized medicine. He went back and was able to get cancer because he didn't have a pot to piss in, basically. Like at that time, he was sort of a starving artist at that time. So he did that, and then he kind of like left comics for a while, and sort of went into business for himself. To use
oh, nice.
And
we know that.
And he started his own imprint called Gore Blimey Press, and he didn't really do comics at that point. He was doing sort of like prints, and portfolios, and they would be these like very like lavishly illustrated things that were kind of like in terms of visual impact, were sort of like a quantum leap from like what he had done at Marvel. And he kind of like left comics for a while, and then after Alan Moore did Miracle Man or Marvel Man, he was really blown away by that, and that kind of told him like, oh wait, you can make like great art in the comic book industry, and so it kind of brought him back, and as sort of like baby steps, he wasn't ready to like quite jump in fully, but so as baby steps, he inked this Machine Man miniseries that was penciled by Herb Trimpe. He did like the first 3 issues just inking them. But then by the 4th issue, for whatever reason, he was like, he took over. So he wasn't just inking, he was drawing. And it was like this thing you'd never seen before. It's like amazing. Like, you got to check this comic out. It's
Please.
like, it's the future. It's like evil Iron Man.
Oh
It's
my
like
God.
Robots
What?
and punks like riding on these
Now
like
we're
flying
talking.
motorcycles in the future. Yeah,
What
and-
is it called again?
it's called Machine Man.
Machine
It's like
Man.
a machine. It's
Shit.
it was a Jack Kirby series, and then this was like a mini series like later on in like the early '80s, and like hit that final issue. It was like magic. It's like, where have you been? Like he brought a lot of that illustrative stuff that he was doing in his prints. He found a way to bring that into comics, into sort of narrative comics, and it was just amazing, just incredible stuff. And then his career sort of went on from there, and he did a bunch of things, and then most notably this like oversized series called Storyteller, where it was like a one-man anthology, and it was 3 stories in every issue, and beautiful, and like colored by him and an assistant, and it was Freebooters, which was kind of like a Conan sequel. It was like Conan is middle-aged now,
Okay.
and he's like past his prime, but he's still getting into trouble.
Too old for this shit.
Yeah, exactly. So it was free. It was his name was like Axis the Great or whatever, but it was obviously
okay.
Conan. So there was that, and then there was Paradox Man, who's this guy who travels through time on like a flying motorcycle.
Oh my God.
And then it was the Young Gods, which was kind of like this this mythology that he created with sort of like a Thor sort of thing. But again, these were like masterful comics, amazing, wonderful comics. It was at a weird time for the comics industry. It was like a massive implosion of the comics industry. It was actually like around the time I entered the comics industry. It was
Oh
like
my
the comics
God.
industry was just getting decimated. So this book, kind of died a death. Even though it was like amazing, and I still like love it and treasure it, it died a death. And then you really didn't hear much from him after that in comics. He eventually came out with like these collections of those storyteller stories, where he was going to finish them, but he found himself unable to kind of pick up the thread and finish them. So instead, he made these sort of amazing sort of art books that collected all the existent material and then also collected some like, narrative red herrings and paths that didn't go anywhere. And then he like just sort of talks extensively about the whole process, the whole creative process. So it kind of creates like his own thing out of that. And then also around that time, I think maybe a little bit before that, he similar to this Monsters story, he took like an unpublished X-Men story that he had done, which would have been Life, Death 3. He did like 2 X-Men stories, Life, Death 1 and 2, and then this was going to be Life, Death 3. And he took it and repurposed it and used one of his Young Gods characters called Adastra, and he created Adastra in Africa. It was originally going to be a story of Storm, the X-Men character Storm in Africa, but instead it was Adastra in Africa. And it really cool story, and kind of presented like this, with sort of in black and white, Fantagraphics, hardcover. It was slight. It was very slight, because I mean, originally it was going to be like a single issue comic or maybe 2 issues. So it was not. It did not have the heft of this. When this arrived with this heft, I was shocked. I was like, this. I was not expecting it to be this hefty.
Beefy tome.
Yeah, like there was really nothing from him for years and years and years, just nothing. And it's like what happened?
J.D. Salinger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Terrence
exactly.
Malick.
Yeah, and so apparently, this is the answer. Like apparently, he's been working on this for 30 years. That shocked me. I did not know this was 30 years, because I assumed this was like maybe from like the 90s or something, or something like
made and unreleased, and now that
or like that maybe it's. I thought it started out as a Hulk story in the 90s that he'd been picking at here and there. Turns out it was a Hulk story from the early 80s. So it add an extra decade.
Oh, nice.
So it's 30 years
in
the making, and it was like it was a Hulk. It was originally intended to be a Hulk story.
I have trouble cleaning my dishes and putting them in the dishwasher.
Yeah. So I was expecting a glorified Hulk comic, basically, but and apparently I had heard little bits and pieces about this story over the years, and it was like,
so this didn't come out of nowhere. Like,
right?
People have
because he like he had here and there that he had worked on this Hulk thing. It didn't have, and it was going to be about Hulk's childhood. It was going to be like a backstory of the Hulk, and it was going to be about his like abusive father and things like his alcoholic abusive father and stuff like that. And like, because I didn't realize it was 30 years old, I thought that he was sort of playing off of established Hulk things. Because that was an established Hulk thing, that like his father was an alcoholic, that his father was abusive, and that kind of informed the Hulk. And even, I think there was, and some of this stuff worked its way into the Ang Lee Hulk movie.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, in this like recent interview that Barry Windsor-Smith did with the comics retailer Brian Hibbs, he said that he pitched this comic to Marvel in the early 80s. The editor loved it, was like, yes, this is awesome, let's do this. And it was about Bruce Banner's childhood, abusive alcoholic father, this and that. And so then, I guess, talk of that sort of circulated in the office, and then it just became like, oh, okay, yeah, that's the Hulk's backstory. So then another writer started putting that stuff into his so again, so it came from this, where I thought that he was playing off of what this other writer had done. Meanwhile, this is the source of
that's
that idea.
Awesome.
Things that work their way into the Ang Lee movie. My knowledge of the Hulk is not complete, but I think parts of like the Hulk's backstory, like from that point on, was sort of like, it wasn't just the gamma rays that did it. It was, the pump was sort of primed by things that happened in his childhood, and then the gamma rays just kind of like exacerbated.
Yeah.
Or also like, this kind of gets into this idea of like the Hulk being the result of like technology that was created by the Nazis.
Yeah.
That there was like kind of some kind of like genetic engineering or something along those lines. And so I'm thinking, because of how highly Barry Windsor-Smith holds Alan Moore's Marvel Man or Miracle Man, I'm thinking like maybe it's kind of influenced by that like, okay, everything you thought you knew about this character is wrong, and that the gamma rays is just some like psyop or some but that there's actually like this deep dark story behind the Hulk, but then the public image and idea is like, gamma rays and he saved Rick Jones and blah blah blah.
Any unglamorous or whatever.
Yeah.
Dainty
Ain't he unglamorous or dainty unglamorous, whichever one it actually is.
I saw that double B name on Bobby the Brain Heenan or what's his name? Bobby Bailey or Bruce Banner or whatever.
So it's like, oh yeah, Bruce Banner, and then there's like a general called General Roth, where in the Hulk it's General Ross, and that
his name was Lightning Crack Roth or whatever.
That was one that again like this interview that Barry Windsor-Smith did does give some context to it, but he said like he pointed out to that one specifically like, oh yeah, there's General Ross with the Hulk, and I have General Roth. Like he pointed, but so it is kind of like part of the fun or whatever is because it's a really dark story.
Oh my god!
It's really sad and horrific and scary and depressing and like just some of like the sort of bubble and some of the joy that comes out of this story is just kind of like, ooh, Hulk! You know, which Hulk character is that?
Ooh, who is this character supposed to be? All right, flip the page. It's spousal abuse. I'm most caught up in an idea about like it's like the secret government. Like I like a good like MK Ultra type. Like some secret conspiracy.
Cold War stuff.
Yeah.
Like all those kind of decisions, like setting it in the Cold War. I mean, like, you know, Barry Windsor-Smith. He's you know like an older gentleman at this point. So like that's kind of his era. Is sort of, you know,
I like
Cold War era.
I was interested in it. Was like from 40s to it kept like jumping from 40s to 60s, which
probably his own childhood, but also like if you're doing a Hulk origin story and these stories kind of started in the 60s, like he becomes the Hulk in the 60s. So it's like, okay, so, you know, when he was a kid, that would be like the 40s, you know, there'll be like World War. So it's like, it fits in that context.
It was tough, like, seeing poor Bobby get beat up and got his eye taken out, and that son of a bitch, it makes Steven Spielberg's dad look like...
or Steven Spielberg's fictional dad. Like the way he depicts his dad in the movies, or the dad Mouse figure, which is like, you know, like sort of like his own creation, like his own, like, and then his real dad turns out to be like a pussycat, basically. I like the way the story's told. Like it was kind of challenging at first because, like, I was kind of reading it. I'm like, I'm not sure how I feel about this story. I'm not sure if I like it. Like, you know, but then you get far enough into it, and like things start to coalesce and pay off in interesting ways, and like. It's not linear. It kind of like but like the way it disperses information is really interesting because you do kind of like puzzle over like what happened to his dad, why is his dad, what's going on, who's this guy, how's this character going to relate to all this, and it seemed like the story stepped like kind of deeper and deeper into darkness as it went on.
Oh my god, yeah, like his mom writing in her journal or her diary, like. That was some heartbreaking stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, and the attention to detail too, where like you can see like what she started to write, and they cross it out. It's like, oh my god, just like heartbreaking stuff.
Bruce Banner's mom, you know, like the thing of it being like a Hulk story. In this story, like just kind of reading it, it kind of comes across like he was subject to this government, you know, Bobby Bailey or Bruce Banner was subjected to this government experiment. That kind of like transformed him into this sort of like monster that was almost like doomed from the beginning. Like he wasn't going to last long, and that like maybe he rampaged for like a weekend, and like I don't know how that would have read or what that would have been on its own. I just know how it works with a Hulk. So it's kind of like as a Hulk story, it's like it's sort of it's almost like the first Hulk story and the last Hulk story, and then all the Hulk comics you've read are kind of like what's in between. It's like you know, it's like him starting his career and then him ending his career, and whether all those Hulk comics you read took place over the span of like a weekend or a month or 30 years or whatever. Like this is like, you know, how the story ends.
Talk about like a tragic character. You were duped by an army recruiter. You were mutated into the Hulk.
This is a story that was kind of like begun 30 years ago by an artist, a very sort of sensitive, introspective, does things his own way. Like you know, when you think of an artist, you know, like a true artist, you know, and somebody who had already sort of been through cancer and cancer treatment. So it's like that's where the story, like the creation of this story, begins with that context. But then he goes on to live 30 more years of life, and I mean he's an old man that, like, you see him in interviews and stuff, and he still looks like Barry Windsor-Smith. Like, he still seems like he's got the vim and vigor of this artist, but he is an old man. And when he talks about this, he's like, yeah, this is my last comic. Like, I'm not doing another comic after this. And he's like, if I do another book, it'll be the making of monsters, which I'm on board for. And he's already, like I said, he's already done books. Like, he did sort of like basically a collection and making of, you know, freebooters and young gods. You know,
it feels like this, like somebody had to make this. It didn't just drop. It's like it dropped out of the sky.
Like I can't
believe
it's like a very inefficient way of making a comic.
But
you know,
yeah. What do you mean? That's interesting to me.
Well, it's inefficient, but it's like it's the way he had to make it and the way he works, and his work kind of bears the mark of that kind of commitment. That it's not something that can just, you know, it's something that needs time to sort of gestate and germinate. But what I mean by that, like, again, a lot of this is coming from like interviews and stuff with him. But he said, like, he doesn't write like an outline. Like, he doesn't write like, okay, here's what the story's going to be, and then boom, execute it. He kind of like half draws, half writes, all at the same time. Lets the thing unfold. Lets the characters take on a life of their own, tell the story, and he just like draws it in this like exquisite detail. It draws it, and then maybe it starts going somewhere, and it's like, no, that's not right. And then he throws out a bunch of pages, and then starts over. So it grows that way. So as a result, there's a ton of like pages and art that didn't make it into this. God. That is and from seeing other works that he's done where he shows his like deleted scenes and stuff. The stuff's really compelling. It just didn't fit, you know, the narrative that he was telling. There's still like, you know, beautiful scenes and so I'm up for that book for sure. And also like that making of book would also have a lot of the pages where it's still the Hulk. And it's the Hulk. That's how they're selling this. They're selling this book as like, you know, this great genius has been toiling for 30 years on something that started out as a Hulk comic and then mutated into something else, and here it is. So like that Hulk part, like, you know, like I'm on board. Like I wouldn't have suggested, as much as I enjoyed this book, I wouldn't have suggested it to you if it didn't have that Hulk thing. Like, I know how much you love the Hulk, and that was like, okay. You know.
I was like, I also love a good Airwolf, like helicopter. Yes. A lot of good attack helicopter scenes in that. I was great, like, helicopters. So awesome. The way they looked, incredible.
Yeah.
And having it be the length that it is, I became like a lot of characterization, like little details. I'm like,
you're just invested in.
So
and it's
all
like,
in.
I mean, there aren't very many, you know, books, like very many graphic novels that are like so you know, sort of thorough and of a piece and perfectly crafted, and then you add the extra element of just the detail that's lavished and the depth and the thought and like of all these compositions, and then all that hatching and stuff. Like, I don't know too many like works that you can compare this and be like, oh yeah, here's another one like this. Like, this is something this is a comic that takes 30 years to make, you know, and also there's no way around it.
Can kill a drifter with.
Like, a more efficient way of doing this would be to sort of like write, rewrite the script, maybe draw a couple quick thumbnails, blah blah blah, figure it out, and then boom, execute, and just like, you know, execute efficiently. Maybe cut some corners, you know, this and that. But that's kind of like, that's the difference between like Barry Windsor-Smith and everybody else, basically. So it's like, so you'd be able to maybe do this in 10 years or 5 years or 3 years, you know, but he had, you know, he had.
Is he in his 70s now?
Probably? I think so. Yeah.
I still got time to do something with my life, Tom.
If I start a book like this now, you know, like I'll probably be finished like around the age that he is now. I'll probably be around there. But
you'll finish your book and I'll be face down dead in a ditch.
I don't want to do that. Like I don't like. And again, like, it's like, hey, you're no Barry Windsor-Smith. Like, I know, like. I don't want to spend 30 years on a comic, and if I do, I would feel real bad about myself. It's kind of like that. It's It's like and it's like 30 years, and it's beautiful, and man, like the cross hatching and stuff. Like he's creating all this atmosphere with cross hatching and all these different like lighting conditions.
Like holding the book up to my face, and I'm like, I think there's like a million individual like pieces of shattered glass here. I was like, what?
Well, because he has his way of doing things, and he has his sort of stand. Like to him, this is the way he wants his comics to look, and anything less than this is shit. Like he kind of says, like he said in that interview, he said something along the lines of like I don't have any. He said, I don't have any fun making comics. It's really difficult. It's really hard. And he said, the guys who do have fun making comics, it shows, and in a bad way. Like it's like,
yeah, like when I'm making music, I have fun, like creating.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's all different ways to make comics, and or to make any creative. And there are people, like I think there are more people who sort of create things by beating themselves up, and like some of the greatest things sort of come out from people who beat themselves up. I think of like Conan O'Brien or something as like a ready example of somebody like that, and then it's kind of like you sort of reach a point where it's like, okay, I can continue beating myself up, making myself miserable, but is there a way that I can be every bit as thorough as I need to be, and every bit as engaged and aware and present, but go a little easier on myself and maybe have a little bit of fun, God forbid,
You know what? I think you're right too. Is like I'm always like, this sucks when I'm making something. Like I'm like, I hate this. I'm terrible, and like I think I'm always putting myself down.
Yeah, I think that's sort of a natural way, and I think most people who like really achieve kind of like start out there, but you kind of reach up and I've been there too, and then I kind of reached the point where it's like I gotta figure out another way of doing this, without without like self-flagellation.
Oh no!
The Salise.
It's Paul Bettany from
the Da Vinci Code.
Da Vinci Code.
Barry Windsor-Smith has this sort of like impeccable body of work, but it's kind of like if he would have like knocked this out a little quicker, he would have maybe been able to do like one or two more stories with like people riding around on flying motorcycles.
Now we're talking. Good thing I had a little bit of on an upswing while reading this. If I was already in like a darker place, that would have probably taken me to like an even darker place.
It's a downer. It's a downer. It's a fucking downer. It's but I mean, yeah, it's like you can't argue with its greatness. I mean,
they're awesome.
The way he handles dialogue, and if you go through like his work going pretty far back, the way he handles dialogue is really interesting. It's really good. I like the flow of it, and then his like balloon placement, and like he works really hard on that kind of stuff, like making the whole thing a whole, and having these interesting conversations. But it's like sometimes the conversations were like too thorough. It's kind of like it is like a little more like a little more tell than show inside, like, and it would be kind of like these conversations of like, I gave him a spud gun. What's a spud gun? Oh, is a spud gun a gun you use to shoot spuds? No, you potato head. A spud gun.
Spud gun. It was it wasn't a spud gun. The gun that Spuds McKenzie used to kill that guy.
Exactly. Like it's this conversation that goes on almost like a who's on first kind of thing. And it's like okay, there's a deleted scene. Like please, and it's kind of like you don't have to, I'm glad that you're thorough with these conversations. You don't have to be this thorough.
Oh my god, so many scenes of that fucking bastard. What was his name? The abusive dad.
Yeah, the dad's name is Tom, and he's
shooting that gun over that kid's head. Like, oh my god.
He's Nick Nolte from the Ang Lee Hulk movie.
Oh my god. He's like, oh my god.
This comic, like this story, is like kind of like the origin story of like sort of like the Hulk as we know him, and almost like a game of telephone or fractured fairy tales. Like the basics of this story kind of like leaked into the Marvel universe, was sort of presented in an inferior. It was presented in an inferior manner. Like had Barry Windsor-Smith been able to sort of tell that story, it would have taken 30 years, but it would, you know, but like those things did kind of make their way in some form, and even, you know,
that's
in
so
the
interesting
movie.
that you.
It's kind of weird. Like that is the nature of the beast, and I've heard a number of stories of this sort of similar thing happen, where somebody like sort of pitches a story and like, yeah, we love that story, like where it'd be like two guys pitch a story at Marvel or wherever, and it's like, we love that story. And we want you to be part of it, and you, see you later.
Oh
like,
no!
You know,
Oh my
that
God.
kind of stuff. Like that happened with like Rick Veitch and somebody else in this like story, like this story that he had done at Marvel, and it's like, and then like, and Rick Veitch, it was like, okay, Veitch, we don't want you. We want this story, and we want your co-creator, but you take a hike.
Wait,
and then
what?
Rick Veitch said it was kind of funny because then some things like kind of worked their way into the story that were like, so like there was a character whose name was like an anagram of his name, and like they left that in. It's like they didn't think to kind of take that out. But again, it's like, this is just how it gets. So it's like in this sort of like, you know, which is why like, you know, you shoot for this, which is why, like, as much fun as it is to make a Hulk story that's officially the Hulk, and he's green, and he's the Hulk, and it's General Ross and not General Roth, like, as much fun as that is, like, it's like, you gotta do it this way. You gotta, like, do your own thing, because you're just kind of, like, otherwise you're fed into this meat grinder. And guys like Barry Windsor-Smith and stuff, like, they kind of learn this lesson, and you know, we're the beneficiaries of those hard-earned lessons that they have.
Tom, this was one of the best things I've like have consumed in a long time.
I'm glad. Yeah, like I was kind of blown away by, and I've been waiting for a new Barry Windsor-Smith thing for a really long time, and I've been waiting for this specific story. Like kind of like the story of it really started to leak like a number of years ago. I forget exactly when, but it's like a number of years ago. It was kind of like, okay, Barry Windsor-Smith is like close to completing this Hulk story. He's turning it into something, and it's going to happen, and it's going to be Fantagraphics, and it's, you know.
It was interesting in the story when they were like General Roth's on the phone, and then he was like talking about a Yankee Rose, and he had like leather chaps and a ninja sword. He kept doing like splits and stuff.
General David Lee Roth. There's like this image, and it's the image on the cover, but it's like the Bobby Bailey like monster character with like American flags sticking out of his ears, and man, like, you know, that with the Hulk, you know, like
God.
a drawing of the Hulk, like, and again, that's what we would probably get in the making of book. It's like, okay, here's a picture of the Hulk, and he's green, and he's got American flags sticking out of his ears.
They said he had like a 4-foot schlong or something.
Yeah, I mean, again, these are all kind of like jokes that like, you know, would totally apply to like the Hulk, where it's like, it's, you know, and
in the movie adaptation, I think they cast Ron Jeremy.
kind of reading this and squinting and trying to see like the Hulk isms, like the Hulks, and envision it, and like, oh, this, and even like, okay, there's like some really dark stuff, like especially as it goes on and you get into like what was going on in that, like that Nazi bunker and stuff, like really dark.
What the fuck happened?
Yeah,
in there?
but then it's also like, and I feel like you get all your questions answered. Like it's very thorough, and the way it disperses information is really like, it's not linear, it's not exactly non-linear, but it's sort of told in the way that like disperses information in ways for like maximum impact, and to make it build and sort of crescendo, even if that means, you know, this threading this kind of needle through like all these different times and stuff, and you know, some gut punches, but like even like, so with all that, it's like, okay, that Nazi guy who loses a hand,
pulls a Hans Landa.
yeah, it's like okay, which Marvel character is that? Is that supposed to be Baron Strucker? Is that Baron Zemo? Like which? Like, and it's like, okay, you know, Baron Strucker had like the Satan claw in the Nick Fury story. So is that the origin of the Satan claw? There's like a lot of psychic stuff, like the army recruiter who kind of sells him on the like immediately regrets this decision he made, and he's got like a daughter who's psychic, and it's like, oh, you know, in the Hulk version, is his daughter Jean Grey of the X-Men, or like is he Charles Xavier? Is he, you know, like you know, what's the, like, just tell us what's the Marvel version of this, so we can at least like have it going on in our heads.
His daughter had the second sight, and then like, I was getting choked up leading up to it, but what I would say was, oh, here it is. Right when I got to this page here, like this panel reminds me of that picture of or that painting of the woman like laying looking up at that house. There's a movie from a couple years ago called Source Code, with Jake Gyllenhaal. I think it's by Duncan Jones, David Bowie's son.
Zowie Bowie.
He like is dying, but they're using him like they're going into his mind to try to find a bomber on a train or something. I really can't remember, but he's inside his own head, living like his life out like that.
They've done it all. They've fucking done it all. They've done Old Man Hulk, Last Days of the Hulk.
They ever do Medieval Hulk?
They've done it all. They did Gladiator Hulk, and like Barry Windsor-Smith, like one of the sort of barriers to entry for me in reading this is like it's front loaded with a lot of like psychic stuff, and maybe in the context of like a Marvel Universe story, that stuff might go down easier because it's like, oh well, here's Professor Xavier and here's Jean Grey and here's this and here's that, but this is like your starting point. It's spending a lot of time just sort of taking for granted all this psychic stuff. And Barry Windsor-Smith, like, he put out 2 books called like Opus 1 and Opus 2, and they were like art monographs. They were like, okay, here's a bunch of my art, but then the text for them, instead of being like the more typical thing of like, oh, here's this thing and here's what I was thinking when I was making it, they're instead these like extended essays about like psychic phenomena and time travel and things that he's experienced in his own life. And he talks about how like he heard the song, the Pink Floyd song, I think maybe like Another Brick in the Wall. It was like The Wall Pink Floyd song, which came out in like 1980. It's like he's saying like he heard that song in like 1969 or something, and so it's stuff like that. It's like, and talking about like alien abduction, like alien stuff that he's so like he's, maybe it's shtick. I don't think so, but like to me it seems like this kind of psychic stuff, aliens, time travel, are all things that he kind of like believes in, and in a very visceral way, and feels as though he's had this direct experience of it. So he doesn't feel any need to kind of like slowly usher you into those things. It's like no, this stuff's a given. This is like, okay, there's water, the sky is blue, psychic, astral projection, blah blah blah.
I had groundskeeper Willie's like voice. It's like, use your shinin' boy.
Yeah, there was like a very big like the Shining kind of vibe. And again, it's like it's a very personal work. It's coming from the gut, I think. Like he's just, and it's like you can feel like the influences. You can feel Stephen King and The Shining, and you can feel Alan Moore and Miracle Man and these sort of like dark government experiments that have some kind of like cover story that's kind of like sunny and bright, but then underneath it's like
dark as fuck.
And so you can kind of feel the influences these, and then even I can maybe even see like maybe an autobiographical streak to it, because like I don't know what his experiences were as a child, like who knows, but like he did sort of like grow up in that sort of like post World War II era where it's like a lot of people like dad didn't come home, or dad did come home but he was very different. He was not the guy who went away, or maybe you never knew your dad, or maybe like Bobby Bailey, he didn't really know his dad until he was a little old, like he was like 5 or 6 or 7, and then he like meets his dad pretty
it's
much for
so
the first
heartbreaking.
time. Yeah.
Right from there's like no screwing around. Like he's got his little uniform on, and his dad's like, take that dumb thing off or something. I was like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's that like post-war generation that like the baby boomers or whatever. Like it's a little bit maudlin, it's a little bit melodramatic, but again, it's like it's unapologetic. It's his point of view. It's kind of got like some like stiff upper lip and self-sacrifice, and sort of like morality that's again like very much a part of like romantic literature, and maybe can be viewed almost as like again old-fashioned or corny or whatever, but it's still like this book still kind of like it does hit, like it does have a gut punch, and a lot of those cliches are, because they're sort of like from another era, maybe aren't really cliches anymore, like it's kind of like things that were like a cliche 20 or 30 or 40 years ago and then kind of like goes away for a while and then comes back can you know be effective. I don't know. It's like I'm still like this was the first of like many times I'll read this book and revisit it. And which is kind of like because it is a downer, and it is like it's not. This isn't pop. This isn't pop. Like I'm a fan of pop.
Yeah, the Total Recall show, we fuck with pop.
Yeah, we like pop. I like pop, and again, it's like I love pop. I love escapism. And this is not that. Like this is sort of like has like the ambitions of like literature, the ambitions of great art, and that it's gonna like it will like enrich you spiritually. It will be truthful. It will tell uncomfortable truths. It will unsettle you. It will change, deepen, or enrich your view of like the world that you live in, and and it is a horror story. Like it is a horror story. So you are going to be unsettled and kind of like look at your world a little different.
Horrifying as hell. Like talking about pop and stuff from a I really like I don't know much about comics. Mm-hmm. Like the pretty pictures in there, my favorite.
Like in sort of like comics circles, like in comics creator circles, like your point of view would be loathed and hated. It's the point of view of like comics schmomics. I like the Hulk. Like give me the Hulk. Like I don't care if it's like just give me the Hulk. And if I gotta hold my nose and read a comic book to get my Hulk, then I'll do it. But I want to watch, like if there's a movie like that's my first, or a TV show or a video game, like it's like, it's like okay, I'm into the Hulk. And I guess I gotta read this big boring
definitely. Where's the Hulk? There's not a spot of green in this thing.
Tom, you told me this was a book about the Hulk. When's the Hulk show? I read this thing cover to cover.
Tom lied. You lied to me. You said the Hulk was in here.
How can it be the Hulk if he's not green?
Black and white.
You can get your Crayola markers or whatever and make them green if you want.
I tell you what, I'm gonna do the Matt Zeoli edit, Barry Windsor. I'm gonna get my Crayolas and color this fucker.
Yeah.
You know what, Tom? I read through this whole thing. I didn't see the Hulk once in this.
I'm picturing like so he said that he began this story like around the time he did sort of like a famous like Wolverine story called Weapon X. And
nice.
Beautiful, like lavished with detail, and atmospheric, and had a lot of similar themes of like government dark, black ops, government experiments, body horror, but focusing on Wolverine. So he kind of like, and that thing.
When he did Weapon X, like, I felt like when I was in elementary school or middle school, like Weapon X, I had like that name that like
you may have read it. I mean, like Weapon X, just like how the stuff from this kind of like seeped into, Marvel and the Hulk story. Through like other through other filters or whatever, the Weapon X thing kind of like what he did in Weapon X kind of became like a jumping off point for like other writers and other, except he actually like got the thing into print and out there, and so was able to kind of be sort of credited and part of that, or at least get his thing on the record before before like other people ran with it. But Weapon X, I forget how many pages. Maybe it's like 100 some pages or whatever. So he did like Weapon X, and so I could picture this, maybe having come out as like a Hulk story and being like around that like 100 pages. But then he also did like, he would do like these like single issue kind of things that would be like 20 some pages or less that would end up in like some like Thing stories, the Thing from the Fantastic Four. They would be kind of like trifles. They'd be these like little stories of like various lengths, and I could see this being like that, like maybe being like a single issue, like being sort of like 20 some pages, and you can sort of see like some of the highlights of like here he is in front of his house, where his house is like drawn in that style, and or you'd have like, or maybe even like a double, like a 48 page story or a 32 page, something like that, but like I don't think it was ever like planned to be like a 300 page like heavy.
Yeah, when do you think that like I'm going all the way to like a 400 page like
yeah, I don't know. I am sort of like waiting with bated breath for like the making of book. I hope that does happen. I hope it happens sooner rather than later, like because I want to know about the process. I want to know, like, has he just been steadily slowly but steadily working on this for 30 years,
Holy
or did he
shit.
kind of
Oh
put it
my
aside
God.
for a while and then come back and like do this like very intense kind of like work on it and then put it aside for 5-10 years, and then I'd love to know, like I'd love to see like this sort of diary entries and then.
There's so much I feel like that I'll get from multiple passes through it.
Yeah, like, and part of the way through this book, I was kind of like, man, like, this is good, I'm enjoying it, but I'm never reading this fucker again. Like, maybe I'll flip through and look at the pictures, I'm never reading this fucker again. But then by the end, it was like, yeah, I would like to like revisit this, from time. Like, I feel like this is going to be a book that's like part of my life,
Yeah, because you're right too. Like when I was going through it, I'm like, oh my god, it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, it's kind of like once you've sort of like experienced it and then kind of gotten some of the like shock and whatever behind you, then it's like, okay, I can sort of come back to it.
From the pretty picture standpoint, some of my favorite spots in there were I liked the car chase.
Yeah,
that was so awesome.
There's like great action in it, and again,
Yes.
you do get more of the pop. There is a lot of really fun stuff in his body, but like he always sort of had this like depth and melancholy to his work, but there was also like a little more like pop and fun, and of course like the sort of like comic book color scheme kind of helps lighten the mood,
Because like we were saying, when we were like when I was in like middle school, elementary school, like Weapon X, that's like Wolverine with all that shit on him and like his like helmet and
the
stuff.
helmet and stuff. Yeah,
yeah.
You may have read it when you were a kid. I guarantee you've seen some of the imagery because
Yes.
they've repurposed it, used it elsewhere, the Weapon X stuff, and then so he did all that like Conan stuff, and the Conans just like get better as they go on, and then like the last 2 issues of the Conan comic is like amazing, and then he did like a couple sort of like Conan black and white magazine stories that got like Red Nails is one of them that got like reprinted in these like oversized treasury editions in full color. So like, and the stuff just gets better and better. And then like when he comes back to comics later, and then it's like the early 90s, he's like working he's working for all these different companies like Malibu and Valiant and like doing different stuff. And at Malibu, he does this character called Roon, which is kind of this like vampire character. Super cool, awesome, a lot of fun, dark.
Sick.
But then he does, like, this is one of those, like, lost gems, and it's, like, one of the best comics ever. It's Roon versus Conan. So he's been away from Conan for, like, maybe a decade, maybe 2, I don't feel like doing the math, but he'd been away from Conan for, like, years and years and years, and then does, like, a crossover, Roon versus Conan, where he brings this, like, whole new aesthetic. It's like, just prior to his, like, storyteller aesthetic with these beautiful images, beautiful color. He does this like amazing. It's like one of the best Conan stories ever, and it's it's Conan versus this like character. Like it's basically Conan versus Dracula. I became like a Barry Windsor-Smith super fan. I'm a Barry Windsor-Smith super fan, and I was all over this book. I could not wait. I was counting the days till it was really. I got it like the day it came out, and
You turned me on. I'm a Barry Windsor-Smith mega fan right now, and I'm excited like to go back through his. I'm like, there's so many like you said. So many Barry Windsor-Smith treats in the store.
And again, he's like by comic standards, like comics creators are by and large very prolific. You look at Jack Kirby, look at Steve Ditko, like there's a million comics, and by comic book standards, Barry Windsor-Smith is not prolific. He's very careful. He picks and chooses. He does things at his own pace. By comic standards, he's not prolific. By any other standard, he is prolific. He has drawn so many stories, so many pictures, he
like the Stanley Kubrick of comics.
Yeah, exactly. And so like the Stanley Kubrick of comics is like a Billy Wilder of film or whatever. It's like like for me, like my journey as a Barry Windsor-Smith super fan was I'd always heard his name, Barry Windsor-Smith. Oh, he's great. I didn't really know his work. I'd be at like a comic convention or whatever, and I'd see like comic art. Original art hanging up on the wall, and then it would be like, like a Jack Kirby page, $150, a Steve Ditko page, $300, and then it'd be like, like this like tiny Barry Windsor-Smith sketch, and it'd be like $1,500. His stuff was like, I'm like, man, this Barry Windsor-Smith guy's got to be a big deal, and so I'm like, I got to check his stuff out, and then like they had these kind of like Dark Horse Comics had these collections of his like Conan stories, and like I was already a huge Conan fan, huge like Barbarian fan, whatever, and I'd read a bunch of Conan comics, and then I saw these Dark Horse ones, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is Barry Windsor-Smith, the guy I keep hearing about, and like apparently, he's very important because he did like the first Conan comics and stuff, so he's like historically important, but how's the comics? And so I'm reading them, and like I just was not into them. I was not digging them. I kind of working my way through it, and I'm like, yeah, I don't see how this is like I like an Alfredo Alcala Conan story better than this. I like a John Buscema Conan comic better than this. And then and sort of skipping around through the various volumes, it's like, oh, and then Dark Horse volume, it had like, okay, there's some like Neil Adams Conan comics. I'm like, I like this better than the Barry Windsor-Smith stuff. I'm like, I don't get it. But I sort of eventually like made my way through all the Barry Windsor-Smith stuff through this reprint. And then when I got to the end, the last two Barry Windsor-Smith stories in these, like the next to last, and then the final one was The Song of Red Sonja, where like they introduced the character of Red Sonja, which is kind of like based on a Robert E. Howard character called like Red Sonja or Sonia or something, spelled differently, and she was like, I think she might have been blonde or something, but she was not a Conan character. She was like a character from a different Robert E. Howard series or so. I think she might have been part of like a sort of like a modern day like a detective kind of story. But Roy Thomas and Barry Windsor-Smith together kind of like concocted a new character sort of based on that, and put her in the like Conan milieu. And that final issue, like it was like, oh wow, this is like a really good comic. I really like the Hawk. I really like that next to last story, and I absolutely love this final story. And then it kind of got me like, okay, like I didn't like that other stuff, but like, okay, I'm starting to get it. And then I was like, okay, well let me like track down, because I'm getting these out of the library or whatever. So I'm like, okay, let me track down that Red Sonja comic. So I got the actual comic, and I held the actual comic in my hand and looked through it, and like my head exploded. Like it was like, wow, like it was so much better in the comic. And it's because the Dark Horse collections had sort of like this kind of like just sort of run-of-the-mill kind of coloring of the day, which was kind of like how they would around that time, and even today to an extent, was kind of like the default of like how you color like an old comic. So like you take an old comic and it's like, okay, it's Conan, so it takes place in the olden days. There's a lot of dirt and mud and sand, and so it's like it's just gonna be like browns and golds, and that's how everything was ran. And so it kind of like it had this like samey quality. So like what Barry Windsor-Smith was doing was just kind of like weighed down by this samey quality. And then but then you see it in like those sort of comic book colors on newsprint, and you got like all these like greens and all this like great treatment of color. It just like it was like that much better. This thing that was like pretty great with the bad coloring was like amazing with the original comic. And then I'm like, okay, I like this. Let me start finding. So I started like sort of tracking down the original issues of all those Barry Windsor-Smith Conan stories that I read and wasn't really that impressed with, and like seeing them in their original context with the original colors. It was like a whole other experience. It was like these stories like were amazing. They became like some of my favorite comics, and again, and it just kind of taught me this lesson of like how important color is, and like the treatment of color, and some like things were sort of taken for granted, and it made me like, that was around the time I kind of realized that, okay, for my comics I need to color the stuff myself, because like the color's so important and can make or break.
Your comics, chef's kiss.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate. Like it became like so vital to me. Like I was like, wow, like I saw how like I could read the exact same story with a different color and be unimpressed with the story. Like even this, you would think the story would work no matter how you colored, but it's like, no, this is a visual medium, and so a story can be completely sabotaged as
sabotage.
Yeah, as Captain Kirk likes to say. Can be sabotaged, and so like it kind of drove home like how important color is. And so it kind of like, and so then I was like, okay, I'm all in on Barry Windsor-Smith. I just got to make sure I get the stuff that's the right color. And then like how I went from being sort of like curious about Barry Windsor-Smith, not terribly impressed, to being like a super fan. Then it was kind of like I went over to the other side and like all in from then on.
I'm all in on Barry Windsor-Smith too. And it reminds me of like from Zoolander, Owen Wilson, he's like, Sting, I've never listened to any of his music, but the fact that he's out there making it, I respect that. I'm like, Barry Windsor-Smith.
It makes me feel sad hearing him say that it's kind of a closed book, like that that his sort of body of comics work is at an end. Like this is the end, and it's like, I mean, that's just life, and who knows, maybe he'll change his mind. But if he does, like, it's already this amazing body of work. It's sort of melancholy to contemplate anything ending.
He shocks the world by he's like, his follow up to Monsters is like is a 25-page issue adaptation of Carrot Top's Chairman of the Board.
Okay, this is the way he has to make a comic, and he's got to do it his way. And you got your own, you know, you live and die by your own methods, you know, as Jack Kirby once said. You know, and this is his method, his way of doing it, but it's like, that's sort of like the entitled fan idea of like that you're at our service. You work for me, man. It's like, no, it's like this is his thing. He's doing it. We're lucky he's doing it. You know, and
Barry Windsor-Smith's car goes off the road in the snow. I'm your biggest fan. Daddy needs his medicine.
It's kind of how this stuff works. Like it is, you know, like we've sort of seen the extremes of like the entitled fan, just kind of like in sort of like social media settings and stuff. So yeah, we joke about it. You know,
I'm your biggest fan, Barry. What are you doing? That block of wood between my feet.
One more Conan. Can you give us one? Like, he took a, you know, I don't know, 20-year break. Like, okay, he ended Conan, he ended working on Conan in, like, the early 70s or whatever. And then it was, like, maybe, like, 1990, 1991 or something. Like, he does this, or some point in the 90s. So it's like 20 years or close to 20 years between his like, last Conan comic and then this, like, mind-blowing, you know, Conan versus Roon. So it's like, man, if he did a Conan comic, and his freebooters, like the Conan comic, like the sort of unofficial Conan comic, is like incredible too. Like it's comedic, it's action, it's like, you know, it's very sophisticated stuff. Like sophisticated in that, like he's communicating a lot of things, and he's communicating very subtle things in a medium that is not really known for subtlety.
This is causing some Barry Windsor-Smith fever.
Smith-a-mania. Like it is like what Stan Lee was saying about him being like the Beatles. He's like the Beatles. I mean, like this is like a big deal. This is like a big deal among, you know, hardcore comics fans who have like an idea of comics history, and then like among like sort of comics creators, it's a big deal. And that's kind of the world I live in, is kind of the world of comics creators. So I don't know the impact beyond that world, but this is like, you know, this is like front page news in my world. So.
I love the car chase. Mm-hmm. My like standout imagery, like the car chase. I love the helicopters.
Man, I love that helicopters. And again, like the pop. Like I'm like, oh, some more helicopter. Like it's kind of like it's like, okay, well, if you want the pop, read some other Hulk comics. You know, it's kind of like, okay, I'll give you some cool helicopters, some cool tank chases. You know,
the stuff where he's in the tank, when he's in like that, when they're like transforming him.
Yeah, like I'll give you a little bit of that stuff. But if you really want to go hog wild with that stuff, read some other Hulk. But then the thing is, like, I'd love somebody of Barry Windsor-Smith's caliber, or Barry Windsor-Smith himself, delivering some like Hulk cheap thrill comics too. Yes. You know. Like I get like that's my sweet spot as like a fan and as a creator. My sweet spot is like the middle brow, like not quite highbrow, not lowbrow, but like right in the, like something that's like got kind of like one foot in like the goof and the fun and the pop, and then one foot in the serious. Yes. Like I don't like anything that's like too far in either direction, you know. And I like.
Right there with you.
It's like, you know, here's my letter to Barry Windsor-Smith. Can you give me something in that zone? Like, can you give me something kind of fun and poppy that's like a little smart? Which is what kind of like his work leading up to this is. His work leading up to this is kind of like, you know, it's like he's putting on a show, he's an entertainer, and he's kind of like challenging you here and there. And like that's my sweet spot. And then he's like moved into this like other realm, sort of like the realm of sort of like a mature artist who's sort of like contemplating their own mortality and the cold hard facts of life and reporting back to those of us who maybe aren't there yet or don't see that perspective.
I loved I loved all the snow scenes, all those big fat like snowflakes coming down. I love the look of Bobby Bailey's monster, like.
Yeah, it's great monster design, and I think that's like you were talking about the Bernie Wrightson similarity.
Yeah.
And I think that might be what you're picking up on, because like Bernie Wrightson stuff is like very. Have you seen Bernie Wrightson's Frankenstein?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that like he uses like this kind of like rendering, of like a sort of like very intricate sort of like hatchy rendering, and then this monster design is kind of like a Bernie Wrightson kind of design, like the asymmetry and like the teeth It is kind of like
Yeah.
Anton Arcane. It's kind of like Arcane
Oh, yeah.
from Swamp Thing. It's got a little swamp. So I can see what you're talking about of like a origin story of the Hulk, but it's like the story of everything but him. Like all the like it's the story of the right and wrong and the ups and downs and the good and the bad of everything in his world except him. He's kind of like, yeah.
I already I gave this 1-star review already on Amazon. I was already on there. This is
Worst Hulk story
ever. I got tricked, duped, not nary a Hulk in here.
You know what? I'm gonna check like the Amazon review because I am curious if there's anybody who's like got that perspective of like.
I can't believe it. Where's the Hulk? Where's Hulky?
Like the people who like are basically like a real life version of the Hulk, like this kind of like overgrown toddler who just like rages and wants what they want.
Me want Hulky. The imagery from his dad was as that like spider reminded me. There's a really good but like dark movie. It's by I think Matthew Holness. He's like Garth Marenghi from Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. He has I think it was called Possum, and it has this puppeteer has this like spider, and like just like the imagery of that spider from that movie Possum was like. And it has kind of the same themes too.
The spider in this is kind of like also kind of like a Wrightson kind of like Arcane.
Oh,
because Arcane would turn into a spider sometimes too. I was not thinking of Bernie Wrightson like I'm so like in Barry Windsor-Smith land when I'm reading this. I didn't even think of Wrightson, but that is like a really like spot on comparison. He does a lot of like subtle shifts in like the lighting and stuff where. Which is really hard to do in like a crosshatch style, like where it's like, oh, okay, there's candlelight going on here, and there, and you can feel light changing. Like it's he was fully engaged in this, from the story to picture making.
Wasn't taking any shortcuts.
Yeah, not at all. Like and he kind of like he just can't do it any other way, and he's talked about it like in one of in his art book Opus, he talks about like. Okay, here's a painting, and it's like, here's all these stars in the sky, and he said, like, the way an artist does stars in the sky is you paint your sky, and make it, a dark color for your sky, and then you take a toothbrush, put some, like, white paint on and go, and then you got stars. And he said, like, I can't do that. I go in with my brush, and boop, boop, and, like, it's like, I know it's inefficient, I know there's easier ways to do it, I know that, like, it might even be indiscernible, like the difference may be indiscernible if I would have taken a toothbrush like everybody, but I can't do it that way. I have to do like, it's
the complete opposite of phoning it in.
Yes, yeah. It would be more efficient and easier to like this thing is so tonal. There's all kinds of like chiaroscuro. There's black to gray to white in various indiscernible scales done with pen and ink or brush and cross hatching. And there's like way easier ways to do that. You can use watercolor. You can use you can sort of like do actual tones, and with modern printing technology, have them reproduced perfectly. You could do that. It's more efficient. You could even do it digitally or whatever. But like he has gone nowhere near a computer. Like this even like he was talking about again that Brian Hibbs interview. He talked about how he made this comic, and yes, the lettering is done on a computer, and the way like the dialogue and stuff, and the way that's done is he's drawing all this stuff on paper, and then his assistant goes on the computer and types it in, and prints it up, and then he glues those dialogue balloons to the actual paper, and then he said. He's been working on this so long. Some of those things have like just fallen off. So he's got like stacks. So he has not touched a computer, and like good for him. He's gone his entire artistic journey without having to debase himself by touching a computer. So hats off. Like I could at one point I had ambitions towards that of hey, I don't want to look at a screen all day. I like looking at paper. Paper is curative and renewing and it's easy on the eyes and it's pleasurable, but eventually, the pluses outweighed the minuses for me, and I gone digital. I still have a paper component to my work, but like I've largely gone to like almost out of necessity, but like here's somebody who didn't.
Dylan goes electric.
Yes.
Windsor goes electric.
Yeah, Windsor-Smith goes electric. Yeah, it's a good comparison. Dylan is a good comparison. Barry Windsor-Smith has done comics every imaginable way. Like he has done sort of like watercolor or gouache type coloring with in his storyteller thing, and in like Roon versus Conan. Like he's done every kind of so like he's sort of arrived here, and it makes it very personal. It's like imbued with his imprint. It can be no one else except for Bernie Wrightson. Like Bernie Wrightson.
Bernie Windsor-Smith.
Bernie Wrightson never delivered. Like I can't think of too many people who have delivered this kind of work where it's like a singular creator, this heft, and this investment and attention to detail, and the time scale. But even just like looking at the work itself, like I don't know, like who could you point to? Because like everything else I can think of is like shorter or less less labor intensive, or less dense, or less attention to detail.
If going back to like one of our episodes with like the Kubrick episode with AI, where like it was a long project and
long gestation period.
And Kubrick passes away, but somebody else had to pick up. I'm glad like the mantle for that. I'm glad we got to see Barry Windsor slide into home with it.
I wonder if he ever like thought about that or struggled with it. And that would be my thought. Like when I'm working on a project, whatever it is, I have this sense of urgency because I'm thinking like, what if I die? Like, what if I get hit by a car before I finish it?
I'm gonna finish one of your comics. That's where it stops, and then there's like a stick figure.
Boy, it really turns into shit on page 74. But I do have that thought, and I would like if I spent 30 years on a single story, I would be kind of like, man, like, what if, like it's a real. Like it's a real leap of faith, and I guess like the process is just like it's like his life's work. Like comics is his life's work, and then this was like a story, and you don't, especially his way of working, where he's sort of intuiting and letting the characters and the story lead him. He doesn't know exactly where it's going, and he's willing to follow it on all. And that's like when they talk about like great scientific discoveries and things, they say like that's how they happen. You have to be willing to go on this adventure where you're walking through uncharted territory, and maybe you spend a couple years going down the wrong path, and you got to retrace your like that's how you discover Lake Victoria or whatever. Like what an accomplishment. Like he made it. He set out on this 30-year journey. Probably had no idea that it was going to be 30 years. So it followed it to the and then did it. Like and I've finished long works, and it's really weird to get to the end because it almost like sneaks up on you. It's like you're getting there step by step, and you're working on it for like years and years, and then you get to the end. You're like, wait a second, it's over. It ended. Like it's kind of you're so in that mode of like, okay, next page, but I've had it like enough time, so like this kind of thing, like on that like increased scale. I think like for me, like the longest thing I'd worked on was like 8 years on Godland. I think it was like 8 years, and like by the end, it was like I was feeling the weight of like every page I'd done up to that point. And then I finished it, and like I couldn't wait for it to be over. Like I was so close to it. I'm like, please let's just. I want to finish this. Let me finish this. And then I finished it, and then I was like, let me go back and redraw that last page, because it's like I wasn't like as much as it was kind of like got to be torture towards the end. I part of me wasn't ready to like kind of cut the cord and be done with it. And, so I kind of like drew like so I redrew the last page, or like one of the last pages, and then I was done. Like I just needed that kind of like, okay, now I'm done. The entire body of work was kind of pointing in this direction, and it's you see this, and you see what kind of like all the things that like maybe he viewed as unnecessary being shed from him. And some of those things are things I like. Some of those are things, but he sheds the inessential, and then it's like this is, you know, this is what I have to say. This is where I'm at. This is, you know, this is my reflection of you know, the world as I understand it. And then they talk about like the disgusting stink, like, oh, they're like, smells like like vomit dipped in diarrhea. No, I don't think.
Yeah, I forget. It was like pretty. It was pretty. Like I had to kind of quickly gloss it. Like it was like they talk. Yeah, like the Kevin Smith movie where he's talking about Mallrats or whatever, where he's talking about like the things schlong. Like is it a rock covered schlong? And then Mr. Fantastic does his thing stretches and goes in different directions. And then it's like, oh yeah, the Hulk must have a real massive one. You know, like, you know, Salkind Sr. talking about like, oh, Superman, he has a big one or he has nothing at all. You know, like that kind of stuff. This sort of fixation, this sort of like, you know, striptease that you know, goes on for, you know, for decades or whatever. Like reading this as a Hulk story, it's also kind of like, oh, I never thought of that, but I'll bet the Hulk smells like shit. Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, he's fucking right. He's this big monster. Like, what? He's like, oh, scrubbing. You know, he's this beast. It's like, oh my god. They're like the Hulk's purple pants. They're like crawling up the wall. They're so nasty.
Yeah, because it's not.
They go up the wall.
Yeah, all those little spiders are. Now they like, you know, there wasn't like a John Waters Hulk movie. So there wasn't like a scratch and sniff Hulk movie. There wasn't a scratch and sniff Hulk comic. So we don't know what the Hulk smells, and it is kind of a great, you know, thing. Like, oh yeah, the Hulk. By the way, the Hulk stinks, like worse than you could even imagine. So what's the worst thing you've ever smelled? The Hulk smells worse than that. So it kind of adds like a new dimension. Like these kind of stories, it does kind of change. Like when you go back to reading a Hulk comic or something, it kind of changes things. You're like, oh yeah, this guy. Not only is he like wrecking buildings and rampaging, he's also like, stinking up the
hell. Did the Hulk switch from purple to brown?
Like one of the things with this book is like, there's the sense of like, and I don't know if this is like salesmanship or whatever, where it's like, this is the Hulk story that they wouldn't let Barry Windsor-Smith tell. Like I don't know if it's that or if like if it like evolved into his own thing, and he was like, okay, this has become its own thing. I don't want this to be a Hulk comic. I want this to be my thing, and I want to not have to. Like I don't know if it's like that, or you know, or if Marvel was like, if he kind of presented like when it was a little further along. Okay, I'm written. It's like, you know, we don't want to put like. I wonder if it was like that, which way it was. If Marvel really rejected, you know, what he brought to them, or if it evolved into something else that he wanted to, you know, treat a certain way. He's drawing this thing, like he's creating this thing. He's not at a typewriter typing the story. He's letting the story evolve, you know, crosshatch by crosshatch, line by line, drawing by drawing. So he's got a lot of time to sort of meditate on every aspect of the Hulk, of this particular story, of the, you know, every comic he's ever read, every movie he's ever seen. Like there's all this stuff that kind of like, you know, enriches, you know, like, you know, fold, you know, layers of steel folded and folded over each other and hammered and, you know, like crom or whatever, you know, the riddle of steel. It's like, man, this thing's awesome. This is great. What an accomplishment. But it's like, hey, got anything with like a guy on a motorcycle that flies? That Storyteller series, it's amazing. And like, it failed. And to my mind, it failed just because the whole business was sort of collapsing as it came out. Barry Windsor-Smith has his theories about why it failed. You know, various people have various theories about why it failed. But like, who knows why it failed? But like, the first issue it's great. But it's like almost like, I feel like it starts with the Freebooter issue, sort of like the Conan sequel. And then the next thing is Paradox Man, the guy on the flying time traveling motorcycle. And then like the third one is Young Gods. I feel like if he had put the Paradox Man story with the guy on the motorcycle up front, it would have been a completely different experience. And I understand why he didn't, because it starts with a double page spread, and starting with a double page spread is tricky. And so like he would have had to sort of break the format and put the left-hand side of the double page spread on the inside front cover, which is done sometimes but not often. So I think it fit, but I think that would have been a much better first impression, because it's this massive magazine And if he had started with that story, you open up the book and you're just knocked out by this giant psychedelic rainbow tunnel boom tube psychedelic thing of this guy on this like amazingly drawn flying space time travel motorcycle, and then you turn the page and then you get another double splash of like this guy flying some more on the like the spectacle, the showmanship. I feel like I think like in the store when this comic came out, if like, you know, people were picking this thing up and then opening and as like they'd be like, sign me up, I'm on board, and they would have bought it. And then you read that story, and then the second story is the Freebooter story, which is like a little more subtle, a little more, you kind of have to get into the like. I feel like that might have maybe it would have gone a different road if he put that up front. But I understand why he did.
I gotta take down now my Amazon review. I originally put 1 star. No Hulk, no flying motorcycles. Would not recommend.
It's so cool, and like Paradox Man, kind of like you can see almost like an audition for a lot of this stuff that's in this story in his like work leading up to it. But in Paradox Man, it's told like sort of out of sequence. The sequencing is really interesting. It's almost like there's like the present and then the flashback, and as you read it, instead of like the present and the flashback coming closer and closer together, they're actually moving like further and further apart, and it's all these like interesting digressions, and it is a lot like the structure of like the Paradox Man story is a lot like the structure of Monsters. The thing he's flying through is like the 2001: A Space Odyssey, like when the guy goes on the space odyssey, like
my God,
into the monolith. You know.
This motorcycle's full of stars.
You've been watching Total Recall, the Barry Windsor-Smith Monsters edition of Total Recall. This book's a monster. Run out and get it. We love it.
Yeah.
Awesome book. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and Fantastic Four Grand Design.
I'm Matt Zeoli.
And you can check out my Patreon at patreon.com. Just search Tom Scioli. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Scioli. Follow me on Instagram at Tom_Scioli.
Follow me on Instagram at cinema_tomb.
And another thing that, in addition to, like, me and Barry Windsor-Smith, we have so much in common. We're separated at birth, cut from the same cloth. But but like both started out as sort of like Kirby imitators in comics, but also. He did his Barbarian thing with Conan. I did a comic called American Barbarian.
Holy shit! I can't I fucking love American Barbarian.
I mean, I'm just like a huge fan of the Barbarian genre, and even if I did, like, I love his Conan comics. I love them so much, and they are my favorite. And yes, my first impression reading these like badly colored reprints was like, oh, this isn't as good as Alfredo Alcala. This isn't as good as John Buscema. Like, now I get it. Now I'm like all in, like I love those guys too, but the pinnacle is the Barry Windsor-Smith Conan. So I love, but like, yeah, and so, American Barbarian, it's like Conan the Barbarian comic, sort of jump-started and created the like barbarian genre in comics. I'm eternally grateful. That experience of American Barbarian was like such an amazing one for me, and so happy. So like, yeah, so he did his barbarian thing. I did my barbarian thing. Roy Thomas was like the he was ostensibly the writer, and probably responsible for a lot of the dialogue, not all of it on the Conan comics, but Barry Windsor-Smith was also like a co-writer, co-author, and also, typically the understanding of the Marvel method is that, okay, yeah, the artist is probably doing a lot of the plotting, but I see, like, Barry Windsor-Smith was also doing dialogue, because in the Song of Red Sonja, one of the characters calls one of the other characters a wanker, which like wasn't like widely known in America at that time, but it's sort of, it was more of a Britishism, where now it's sort of more international. But at the time, so like obviously Barry Windsor-Smith wrote that, he at the very least wrote that line about calling somebody a wanker, and so the word wanker was in a Comics Code approved issue of Marvel comic Conan the Barbarian. Subsequent reprints, it was either like wank or wanker, and then in subsequent reprints, it became Wonk. They changed it to Wonk. Like, somebody got wise that, hey, did you know that you have, somebody calling somebody else like a jerk off, basically, I guess.
They changed it to Jack off.
I'm, like, very invested in it. Like I have a lot of, like, years and whatever invested in like, this work and in Barry Windsor-Smith. But none of that stuff matters. It's a book. Like what is this book cold? You know?
Yeah, like I'm coming into this from the from outside, like, the comics.
Like the Hulk thing is kind of like like, you can't separate the Hulk from, like, maybe somebody out there's reading this, never heard of the Hulk, doesn't know this started out as a Hulk, and it get, like, Star Wars, it's kind of like, I didn't know that Star Wars was, like, gonna be Flash Gordon when I experienced Star Wars. Like, it makes total sense in retrospect, but I didn't know that going in.
Yeah.
It really reminded me of the Hulk.
But I'm like, you know what? You're like, is there anything it reminded you of? I'm like, nah. You're like, well, it starts with an H, ends with a ULK.
He's green. One thing I was thinking with this was, like, was this story going to be, like, more or less what it is, and be kind of like, okay, you've heard the thing about the Hulk being from gamma rays, and he's going to save Rick Jones, and then that's how he gets exposed to the gamma, and blah, blah. You've heard that story. Turns out it's bullshit. And here's the real story. And he was actually, like, he had a gene therapy and surgery and all that, and all this kind of, like, and it was, brought over from like, the end of World War II. It was like Nazi atrocities that were, and that's how the Hulk came about. And, like, was he going to frame it that? Was it going to be kind of like, Marvel Man or Miracle Man, or what, like, the Hulk you knew, forget everything you thought you know about the Hulk. Here's the like was it going to be that, or was it going to, were those aspects of it not like it's just it's interesting to contemplate.
Like, yeah, so interesting.
Are we damning this with faint praise by, like, being like, man, I love how it relates to the Hulk?
Yeah, like, could have used a little more green in that book.
Yeah, how come the book design, how come the word, like, there is some color there's no color in the interior, but there's some color in the book design. Why isn't it green?
Yeah.
Was there a version of this that did use green, and then they're like, okay, Marvel just sent us a cease and desist. No green on the cover.
On the cover, it has
you got
a green bar over his eyes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've been dying to read this, dying to talk to you about it, and here we have it.
It's so awesome,
and dying to tell all of you.
All you guys.
He started as Barry Smith and then changed his name to Barry Windsor-Smith. So you'll those first Conans are by Barry Smith. Yeah, because Barry Smith would have made just an all-out Hulk story, and it would have been like Kirby-esque, and
can we?
It would have been like thrills and chills,
coax them into doing one more time traveling.
How about the Hulk on a time traveling motorcycle?
Holy shit! Please
maybe the Hulk, like, it can be sort of like an alternate ending to this, where, like, the Hulk, like, all this horrible stuff happens, but then the Hulk gets on, or Bobby Bailey gets on a time traveling motorcycle, travels back in time, and then, like, undoes all this stuff, and we did it. This comic is an epic. Took 30 years to make. Took me about a week to read. I was reading it in installments. Took me about a week, and then and this episode was an epic, and took us like a whole day to film.
We went the distance on this too. An epic episode for an epic work of art.
It's awesome. Yeah. Maybe what if we spent 30 years working on a Total Recall episode?
I'm into it.
Okay. Yeah. So, like, while we're cranking out our regular flow of episodes, we can also have, like, a larger one that we're picking away at
in the background.
In the background over the next 30 years. So.
All right, we're starting that tonight, right?
That's our next episode. So we're gonna wrap this one up, and then
we got our work cut out for us.
We're gonna do our epic 30-year in the making episode, and we'll see you 2051 with that.
Yep, that's right around the corner. So.
It comes by fast. 2051 comes by fast. See you next time.